Hello, I'm Robin Vincent and welcome to Molten Modular. This is part 2 of episode 18, How Do You Write a Track on Eurorack? Now I know many of you out there are watching the video, or the first part of the video, certainly thinking that I'm going to provide all the answers to that it was actually a tutorial in writing tracks on Eurorack. No. This is a genuine question. It's not rhetorical. Oh no, I am asking the question in the hope that through asking that, through revealing that, through working through ideas, that we could actually come up with some kind of way forward. Because the thing is, and what triggered this whole thing off, is that I've been asked to write a track for a compilation album called Modularism, which is very, very exciting, except I wasn't really sure how to approach it. Still not particularly sure how to approach it. And I got a message this morning to tell me that they're going to need my track in a week. So I have a week. I've been at this a week, and I have one more week. Just a week to do it. So why on earth am I wasting my time sitting here when I should be sitting like this, making music? Well, I'm going to be doing that shortly. I just wanted to update you on what's happened in the past week, what have I learnt, where am I going now, and to see if I have any kind of plan at all. So first of all, if you haven't seen part 1, then I suggest you nip off and watch that first. Otherwise, much of what I'm going to say here isn't going to make a whole lot of sense. But I hope that within this video, which now I fear has this kind of sense of urgency to it, that you will find little tidbits of advice, things I've learned, cool things and reasons to have stuff, and just to come with me through this journey of discovering how you actually pull a workable track out of this machine. I'm going to confess right up front that I do not have an answer to that question. Not a complete answer. I have some answers, a range of answers, and probably more questions. But the most fantastic thing about the video I did last week was the responses that I got in the comments. There's nearly like 200 comments from people suggesting all sorts of different ways to approach putting music out of this thing, whether it's layering up, whether it's turning things up, turning things down, whether it's a modulation crazy thing, whether it's sampling little bits and sticking that into a DAW and redoing it in a bit of a clip launch kind of way. There's people who suggest minimalism, there's people who suggest maximalism. You should stuff it all in, you should bring it all back, you should make it rhythmic or bizarre, random, intentional, unintentional, accidental, or completely planned and written down on a piece of paper. The scope and breadth of ideas that were put forward was just truly amazing. And thank you so much for entering in, to the spirit of what I'm doing, because I am honestly asking that question. This isn't some kind of ruse. I'm not going to back it up with a video that says, oh yes, and here are all the answers. No, this is just me floundering along, and for some reason I have this inner urge to share it with people, with you lot, so you can share my pain and my joys and my triumphs, and I don't know what else is going to happen. I thought it'd be interesting anyway. And the other great thing is that it's a useful diversionary tactic, so I don't actually have to sit down and write that track while I'm doing videos talking about the possibility of making that track. So that works really in my twisted psyche excellently. That's perfect for me, and I know that this time next week I'll be up all night just pulling a track together at the very last moment. Hopefully not. We shall see. So if you watch part 1, then you will notice that my rack has changed. So let me talk you through that first of all. Well, the most obvious thing, and the thing that everyone recommended that I should do, was to pull out the Mother 32. Mother 32 used to sit here. Yes, it did. And now it is no longer there. Where? Where has it gone? Have I thrown it out? Have I sold it? Have I ditched it? No, I have not. I've put it alongside like this. There. Isn't that fabulous? So it's back in its own case, its own 60 HP case with its own power supply. And it occurred to me that if I just sort of sat it at the side, the same as the No Coast is, or has been up to now, is that it will probably end up just getting out of reach, and it's unlikely to find its way back into the full modular. So I thought, what could I do about that? Was there some way I could rack up the Mother 32 and the No Coast so that they work together and stay with the rest of the system? And as you can see, I flipping nailed it. Now the No Coast is in kind of a Eurorack size, but it's not designed to be Euroracked. However, you can do it. There are videos out there that show you how to pull the thing apart, to put some new holes in it and bits and pieces, and then mount it within a Eurorack case. I was not up for doing that. I don't really want to take a hacksaw to my lovely no coast. So I had this other brainchild, which was to use these brackets. Now with the Moog rows that I've been using, their sort of system of modular, they do it in tiers. You have, a single row, then you can go to 2 rows, and you then get a 2-tier bracket, which is what this is. And then when you go for the full 3 tiers, like I've got here, you can have 3 rows looking flipping awesome. But what that meant is that I had this 2-tier bracket knocking around, and with each bracket you get this other bracket here, which goes at the back in order to give it a bit of rigidity. Now you get this 60 HP one with the 2-tier one and the 3-tier one. So I had 2 of them because I'm not using the brackets. I've got a 104 HP row. Is that making sense? So I have 2 of those spare. So all I've done is screwed them in to the rack there. And this has provided a perfect little angled shelf for the no coast. It's just absolutely genius. Still uses its own power supply. That's fine. It's not squeezed in. I have looked at trying to get the Demora in there or something else to go alongside, but it's just not going to work. So this, as it is by itself, is quite a gorgeous and handy little synthesizer station. And hopefully that will ensure that this will stay part of my musical flow and won't just wander off to some other place on the desk. So moving the Mother 32 has obviously freed up a whole load of space in my rack, which is what I was after, and that's enabled me to put in a couple of utilities that I bought last week, a couple of mixers that I felt I needed, and you'll see why they become useful in a minute. But I also picked up a couple of other things. One was a quantizer. I've also got a sequential switch and a clock divider, both of which seem to be vital additions to what I was attempting to do. Because what I'm discovering is that you really don't know what you need until you find that you need it. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean is that I was told a lot when I started off in modular that you need to have a clear idea of what you're trying to do. Everyone would say, well, think about what it is you're trying to do and then get the modules that do that. And my sort of pushback against that is that I don't really have any idea what it is I want to do. I know that I want to play. I want to play with noises and synthesis and mess stuff about and modulate and create and investigate and discover, all that kind of things. And so there's absolutely no way that you're going to know half of the utilities that you actually need. I mean, to start with, even understanding why you need a VCA is a bit of a struggle when you're coming from a purely synthesizer background. And so all these other sort of utility bits only start to reveal themselves once you get stuck in and are trying to do something. So, a quantizer, for instance, I had no idea I needed a quantizer. I assume I would write a pattern in a sequencer and then that would trigger stuff. And it wasn't really until I got the Turing machine that I understood that a quantizer was useful for quantizing random stuff. But now as I'm playing with it, I'm finding it's also useful for further quantization on an existing sequence and also allowing you to do things with that sequence. I'm finding that running the clock around the Eurorack is tricky sometimes. Some things respond faster than others, and there's some things you don't want to happen quite as quick as other stuff. And so getting a clock divider, which I've got here, allows me to slow down that clock by certain factors so that something can be running fast and other things can be running much, much slower. I would never have guessed that such a thing existed before I got to the point where I was actually attempting to do that. And that's the point. The beauty of this whole process, this whole 2 weeks to write a track nonsense, is that it has brought everything into a very tight focus. It's put me in a situation where I have to make progress. I have to stop fannying around with this kind of thing and actually make music, make it work, and work out how to make that happen. And so the thing for me, because what I believe I want to do is I want to do a performance piece. I want to be able to perform with it more or less live and use that as a track. That's kind of what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to play it as an instrument. I could, layer up and then do another layer of stuff and then do another layer of stuff. Yeah, that's fine. But that's not really what I want to do. There might be some of that going on, but I want to be able to do the whole show, the whole thing, the whole track in my rig. And so that's brought various things to bear, like how do I get my sequences everywhere that they want to go? How can I control everything all at once? How can I put more modulation into things? And how can I change chord? How can I progress chords or change key or do that kind of thing? And that's what I went off to learn about last week. I sort of said in my last video that I'm going to spend the week learning various things. I mean, some people thought that was a crazy idea. You just need to get on and do it. Maybe, but there just seemed to be a few fundamentals that I needed to grasp before I could really push forward into the music making. I mean, and these are ridiculous fundamentals that everybody else, of course, already knows. It's just me, because I'm crap at reading and retaining information, and I like to intuit my way through things, which means I don't do anywhere near enough research. I just get stuck in and play. But that's just me. So there's probably going to be things I'm going to talk about for the next sort of 5-10 minutes that are going to be completely obvious to you, and yet to me they've been awesome discoveries. So let me fly through my discoveries then. But first, let's clear the boards. So there you go, that was another complete track there, pulled apart, ruined and discarded, like I do every time. It's just a fabulously freeing thing to think I've been working on that patch, been working all that stuff together that I played at the beginning of this video, and now it's gone. It's gone! That's just amazing. That's something completely awesome. At the same time, it's kind of eats away at your soul. I can't go back to that or something. So the first thing I discovered was with the Mother 32. What I discovered is that I can take a sequence, say from my variegate, plug that in to something. I've got the output of Mother 32 going through my system, and I've simply plugged the variegate sequence into the Mother 32. And then what I discovered is, if I press a key on the keypad, it changes the chord, it changes key, it transposes. Awesome. So that was an easily discoverable first step. Now, what that sort of did to my head was that it made me realize that something like my BeatStep Pro, which has essentially a keyboard on it, I suppose, could be used to change the key of stuff. You can just eject that note into or mixed with a sequence, which would then move it around. Interesting. And that might be simple and usable. It might not. It's just knocking around in my head. Next thing I discovered was with the variegate. I mentioned how I wanted to look at the variegate in a bit more detail, and the one thing that I think I really discovered or got to grips with was the dividing and multiplying, how you can do things at different speeds. So you can have one sequence running at a different speed to the gating, at a different speed to the other channel 3, because I'm using this as a sequencer track, a gating track, a sequencer track, a gating track. That seems to be what works for me. So I've got 2 lots of sequencing coming out and 2 lots of gates. Now it may be that I could start using it as 4 lots of sequencing, because I have gates I can use elsewhere in something like the random rhythm. Now that's a thought. Anyway, so at the moment I've now gated the Mother 32 out of here with channel 2, and that's what's given it the slight different rhythm. I mean, the great thing about the probability in the variegate is it does give this slight randomization and humanization to it, which is great. And listening to this sounds excellent. I might have to use that somewhere, but of course it'll all be pulled apart by the time I get to the end of this video. But the other feature that I learned that I hadn't come across before was the repeat feature. And it's one of the buttons here. You put on repeat and you move one of the sliders or some of the sliders up. And it does kind of a stutter. Which is nice. Maybe what we need to do is turn this video into the generation of the entire thing video. It could just be this. I could start now and we could finish the track in the next 10 minutes. What do you think? No, that's not going to happen. So next up is the quantizer. Now I was using a quantizer in the Distinct 4 because it has a quantizer algorithm in there. You just set it to harmonic or minor or pentatonic or something, and off it goes, and notes go through and they come out beautifully quantized. So I had a look around and I did a bit of research, and I decided that the microscale from IntelliGel was the one that was going to do the job. There are perhaps more fully featured ones, and there are certainly simpler ones, but it had a couple of features in there which I thought were really useful to the situation that I'm in. Now, when I first got the microscale and plugged it in, I just assumed it would be really, really easy, and it wasn't. And it was quite frustrating. It was really sort of scratching my head going, I don't understand why this isn't much simpler. I've now got all these notes I can press, whereas in the disting I just had to dial up a type of scale and you were off. And you can do that within the microscale. It just took a little bit of working out and fiddling with, and there's lots of different options, and it was kind of like a little bit overwhelming because you want to plug in a new module and go, oh, wow, that's fantastic. That's everything I was hoping for. But when I plug this in, I'm going, oh, I don't know. I suddenly don't know what I'm doing, which is not a good feeling, but it is something that I'm kind of familiar with. So I just have to get stuck in. But after a while of chipping away at it, it did start to reveal its beauty, I suppose. And I think I've got the measure of it now, or, you know, more or less. But you do have the ability to change key, to transpose within the quantizer itself. So if I've got my sequence going, I can choose root here and just change it to a different key. So that's a possibility, but it's not particularly on the fly. It's kind of a menu and then a thing. I don't know. I mean, obviously you can turn notes on and off very easily, so you could potentially change chords in that kind of way. But one of the things which was interesting was this second output. Now you can route that to another oscillator and it will play the same sequence. So I now have two oscillators being run by the same quantizer, which is very cool. But it's cooler than that because you can set it up as an interval. So I can go into interval here, and now the oscillators are working apart, transposed from one another. So you have the same sequence but offset, producing kind of this sort of fake polyphony or a two-note chord, if you like. And that could end up being phenomenally useful in a piece of music. The other feature it has is something called shift, which enables you to put CV into the shift input and then transpose the root from there. So that's interesting. That immediately raises a question, what do I have that generates CV that I could stick in here that I could use to control the change, the transposition, the change in chord? Well, I don't know, that was a bit tricky. I mean, I have an LFO that creates CV, but does it actually generate anything useful? Well, I don't know. Let's put the sine wave into the shift. And that's now sending it up and down rather nicely, which is not particularly helpful. Okay, well then, what about a square wave? Because a square wave will actually set it to a value and then back again. Yeah, sort of. I mean, it would be nice if the thing was clocked to the same rate of this, but of course you can actually do that, which is another thing that I discovered, that you can clock the LFO. I had no idea. I mean, of course it's obvious, of course you can sync it, because you can. It has these 4 sockets at the top here, which you know, were not labelled in such a way that I would automatically assume that's what they meant. But I could take the clock out from the variegate, plug it into there, and that could potentially mean the whole thing was in sync. Doesn't sound very in sync, but it could be. That's something I could work on. The other thing is that, I mean, how big is that square wave? How far is it going? Is it moving it an octave? Is it a 1 volt square wave? I could probably measure that somewhere. So what I could stick the square wave into a trim, and that way I can adjust the height of that square wave, and so the amount of CV, and so adjust the transposition. So a much wider change to a much narrower change. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure I'm getting that across in what I'm doing, but that's the idea. So if I can put a square wave in there, I can put an LFO in there, do I have anything else that generates control voltage that I can use a bit more in a more controllable way? Well, the answer lies in the maths. The answer always lies in the maths. I discovered that in channels 2 and 3, so I'm usually using 1 and 4 for envelopes, but in channels 2 and 3, with these knobs here, it actually generates CV. It sends stuff out. Who knew? Who knew that that sort of thing was possible? But it does. So I could use that potentially to move the sequence about. Let's try that. So I've got it, it's coming out of there. Let's put that into 3. Look at that. So yeah, very, very possible. So I guess what I'm kind of getting at is that through this discovery of the quantizer, of the microscale, I discovered a way to shift sequencers about. Now I wasn't expecting to use the variegate through the quantizer, but the quantizer allows me to shift and transpose the sequences coming out of the variegate. And that is very, very interesting. Now, you know, using a knob over here is not ideal. Perhaps going back to the beat step again, where I can put in a set value so I know what the heck is going on, perhaps might be better. Or there might be some other way of controlling that through something else. I'm not sure yet. But the potential is certainly there for doing something interesting, some kind of change, and that's exactly what I've been after. Something else I discovered was with the graphic VCO from Erica Synths. This is a very new oscillator that Erica Synths have sent me to try out very kindly. And yeah, I've only really been fiddling with it so far, but what I discovered is that first of all, it has its own quantizer built in with the latest firmware, which means I don't have to use the quantizer with it necessarily because it will already respond to its own quantization. Now it's quite basic, there's only a handful of different scales available, but it's simple and it works. So that means I could use the quantizer elsewhere. But the other thing is to do with the sub. Normally when you have a sub-oscillator within an oscillator, it's just set to an octave or 2 octaves below. And there it is, and you use it, and it's awesome. With the graphic VCO, you have a lot more control over that sub than I've ever seen on any other sort of oscillator. And that can give us something very interesting. Let me show you. So there's my sub. You can hear that, yeah? So there's the original, that's the sub. They're the two together. Now if I go into the menu system here, go to sub, I can actually change what that offset is. What do I mean? Well, I mean this. So I've now set it to a 5th. So it's no longer an octave below, it's now a 5th below, which means I'm creating an interval. I'm creating a 2-note chord. And not only that, I can change the type of waveform that the sub is. So at the moment it's just mirroring whatever the main oscillator is set to, which is the wavetable that I can morph between. Nice. But I can change that to being something else. I can change it to a sine wave, which I quite like. Triangle. Sawtooth, ramp, square, and then something else. I haven't worked out what that is yet. So that's a potentially useful discovery, and again, using 2 notes together, like I'm using the interval on the microscale, I could actually sort of move beyond the mono, I suppose, because largely in Eurorack you're dealing with monophonic sources, and something which brings in a simple interval like that suddenly makes it feel more polyphonic. It's not real polyphony, but it feels that way and could definitely pad something out into the idea of a pad or a drone which has more than a single note going on. Interesting. Now with this intervaled sound from the graphic VCO, I just want to show you what some interesting gating could do to it. So rather than running a sequence into it, so I pull that out and have it just running as a drone, I could gate it from the maths. Now the maths has a sum output that I could use for part of it, and I can use the number 4 output, which will be using the same sort of envelope for the other bit. So I'm now using a sort of doubling up the envelope from the maths to control both the oscillator and the sub-oscillator. Groovy. Now I need something to trigger the maths. So I'm going to use my random rhythm here. Take the sequencer out, the resultant out of the random rhythm, and plug that into the top. Now what the random rhythm does is you have all these sliders that let you set quarter notes, eighth notes, 16 notes, and triplets. And then you can run that into whatever you like. I mean, you know, it's suggested because it's a rhythm module that you stick it into percussion. And I will certainly do a bit of that. But it's also fabulous for gating, like this. And you can increase the probability that those gates are going to fire by moving the sliders up. If you get bored with that pattern, you hit the dice button and it adjusts it slightly. And on the other side you can throw in a kick drum, throw in a snare, throw in a hi-hat. And of course it wouldn't be a wavetable oscillator if I didn't then sweep through the wavetables. Then of course I can always put the sequence back in. Well, that might be good to clock the two together. Oh yeah, now we're going. So this is what I mean about clocking differences. If I take that out of here, put it into my clock divider, I can then perhaps take a more sensible clock out of here into there. That's better. So I'm starting to pull all this sort of stuff together now. The next thing, the next triumph, the next discovery, if you like, was all to do with mixing control voltage. Now, if you've got a normal synthesizer, the front panel of a synthesizer, you've got your oscillator, your modulators, and your filters, and you all go in a single direction, really, and you get from one end to the other, and you know that you can apply an LFO to various bits and pieces. What you don't really do on a proper synthesizer is mix LFOs or other modulators together. And that's exactly what you can do on Eurorack. And that's one of those things that really sort of starts to bring the magic out of the machine. And it's not something I've looked at previously. And it was one of the reasons why I picked up a mixer, because these mixers here, they mix audio, that's fine. And I'm mixing all my drums over here on my Manhattan Audio one here, which is a brilliant use. I've got 3 inputs. I can take the 2HP hat, I can take the 2 sounds from the Pico drums, stick it all in there, and I'm completely happy. And I've got a little submix for my drums. Awesome. But for the abstract data one over here, I wanted to use that more for mixing control voltages, because that's the other thing that you can do. And that's amazing. So what do I mean by that? I mean, you probably already know all of this, but for me, it was an absolute revelation that I could mix two modulation sources together to produce a different modulation. Now, this came about because I was using the filter a lot, the Jove a lot, and I started using an envelope with it because you're supposed to, that's a good thing to use with it in order to apply an envelope to the filter the same time as you're triggering the sound. And that gives you that particularly sort of squelchy, acidy sound, I suppose. But I found that I was also moving the cutoff a lot while that was going on in order to achieve the sort of sound that I was after. So I thought, well, why can't I get both of those things happening at once? Well, I've only really got the one CV input to apply to the filter. So in which case, perhaps if I mix two control voltages together, could I get it to sweep and envelope at the same time? Sounds implausible, but that's exactly what you can do. And to me, as I said, it was a huge victory this week. Let me show you what I did. So I'm going to take the sub output from our little graphic VCO over there, plug that into our filter, route that back to here. There you go, brilliant. Now I'm going to take the second half of the maths that's currently running the main VCO, and I'm going to plug that into the filter. There you go, that's that sort of acid sound that we like. So I've got the envelope from the maths triggering the cutoff or modulating the cutoff of the filter at the same time as it's also gating the oscillator itself. Yes? Got me? Good. Now what I want to do is apply an LFO to this so it's also sweeping. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my sine wave out of my Batumi, stick that into channel 1 on the abstract data mixer, and then take the envelope that I'm using there and applying that to the second input on the abstract data. Now I can take the output beneath those two channels and apply that to the filter. And the beauty now is that the filter's being swept while it's still doing its acidy envelope thing. And within the mixer, I can also adjust the amount of each modulation source so I can get it to sort of balance through the range that I want to use it with. It's phenomenally helpful and suddenly brings a whole different character to things because you're doing more than one modulation at a time. I mean, this is probably obvious to all of you out there in video land, but to me, this is just phenomenal, absolute phenomenal. So I've got a whole track coming together again. So that is more or less it. That's kind of what I've been bringing together over this past week. I now understand, or at least have a grasp of how I can change chords and change and transpose within the piece of music. I've got an idea of how to mix modulators together in order to create more interesting modulation. I've got various devices within my system to create intervals of notes. So perhaps all of that can help me write this track. I don't know, maybe I'll do something completely different. I have no idea at this point, but this is the gear that I have and this is what I'm going to be working with. I mean, one thing that's happened is that the Distinct 4 has been freed up, so now I can look into some of those algorithms in there and maybe there's something of more interest. Because there is, I feel, something missing. Just a little bit. It's not essential, but you know, I think moving forward it's something that I need to think about. And that's some kind of special thing, some kind of special source, a special flavour or character that I can bring to it. I have a lot of sound sources, I have filters, modulators. I have enough stuff to write a decent track with. But perhaps what I'm lacking is in kind of the effects processing, is in the thing that will perhaps create something special and unexpected sonically within the palette of sound that I've got. Now, of course, eyes are starting to turn towards the clouds. Our friend the clouds here, because that's kind of what that is. I mean, texture synthesizer, I still have absolutely no idea what that means. But I have worked with it, and I have spent so much time, and it takes so long to get anything out of it that's even half good. I mean, in the track that I did last week, that a lot of people liked, which is really nice, and that does give me a massive amount of encouragement that perhaps I could pull this off, is that it had this whomp going through it, which was nice, and that was essentially just the density knob here being modulated. Whomp. Which is great, but it took ages to get anything useful out of it, and I'm just not convinced that it's worth my time. I'm not convinced. Every time I spend time with it, I do get something out eventually, but it's not awesome. It's just kind of something. It's a bit of something going on which doesn't always seem to fit, doesn't seem particularly tuneful or melodic. I just don't think it's for me. So, what do you think I should replace it with? What special modules do you think are out there that would really fit my system and in that space? I mean, I'm thinking of things perhaps like the Make Noise Teleharmonic or the Morphogenie, maybe one of the spectral wavetable rotating things from 4MS. I really like all the new qubit modules as well that we saw at NAMM. Oh, very interesting. Maybe there's something there which would bring a certain something, a certain specialness, a certain bizarreness to the mix. I mean, I've already got the Magneto on order, I think, so that is going to bring a lot of interesting things with it. But perhaps there's something that could replace the clouds that would bring a similar amount of specialness, but something that I would actually enjoy working with. That would be nice. Please stick your suggestions in the comments. That would be completely awesome. So that'll have to do. I have talked and talked and talked more than enough, but I hope it gives you an idea of where I am with my system now, what I'm going to be working with over this just a week, 7 days, hardly even that, to put this track together, because, I've got things to do and kids to look after and a life to lead, while at the same time trying to crowbar in a bit of time to sit down and record a track. I mean, from now on in, what I'm going to be doing is have 8 channels of sound coming out through my ADAT box into my computer for recording at all times. That is what I'm going to have to set up. And every time I sit down, I'm going to need to hit it into record and see what happens. I mean, it's terribly exciting, terribly frightening and intimidating, and I really don't know how it's going to turn out. So that's where we are. And I hope some of my discoveries have been helpful to you to talk about, to try to crystallize these things together so that we can all move forward in our understanding of what the heck this is all about. So I will continue to welcome all of your suggestions in the comments below, and I'm going to go to ground now and just get stuck in and see what occurs. And I'll probably pop up again in a couple of weeks after I've recovered from this ordeal and see where we get to after that. So in the meantime, go and make some tunes.